Here's a reimagined version of the Shawshank Redemption that takes a darker, more brutal turn. Introduction. Life in Shawshank. The story of Shawshank Redemption begins the same way. Andy Dufresne, a successful banker, is wrongfully convicted of murdering his wife and her lover. He is sentenced to life imprisonment at Shawshank State Penitentiary, a grim, soul-crushing place where the inmates have little hope of redemption or freedom. Inside, Andy befriends Ellis Red Redding, a wise, seasoned inmate who has long since given up on the idea of getting out. Despite the harsh conditions, Andy manages to keep a sense of hope alive. His intelligence, quiet strength, and unshakable belief in justice inspire those around him. Over time, he becomes an invaluable resource to the corrupt warden Samuel Norton and the guards, using his financial skills to launder money. Behind this facade, Andy is secretly planning his escape, a plan that will ultimately free him from the horrors of Shawshank. But in this darker reimagining, the prison system is far more ruthless and suffocating than the hopeful tale in the original. The dark corruption of Shawshank's corrupt leadership is more deeply embedded than ever. Warden Norton and the sadistic guard Captain Hadley maintain an iron grip on the prison, using inmates for personal profit, running illegal labor schemes, and meting out brutal punishments to anyone who steps out of line. Andy is useful to them, but they always keep a close eye on him. Unlike in the original story, where Andy's intellect and strategic thinking give him a level of power, in this version, his influence is fleeting. Norton grows increasingly suspicious of Andy's activities and, sensing something off, begins to monitor his every move more closely. Meanwhile, Red, always the cautious one, tries to warn Andy. He notices that the guards are keeping tighter surveillance, and Andy's every small act of rebellion, like playing Mozart over the loudspeaker, has more dire consequences. The feeling of doom builds as the prison's leadership prepares to tighten their noose around Andy. The failed escape and betrayal. One fateful night, Andy puts his escape plan into motion. He carefully works through the tunnel he has been digging for years, a tunnel hidden behind a poster of Rita Hayworth. His heart pounds as he approaches freedom. He's almost there. But just as he's about to break through, the unimaginable happens. Captain Hadley, tipped off by a suspicious guard, is waiting for him on the other side. Andy emerges from the tunnel only to be greeted by blinding flashlights and a dozen guards with guns drawn. It was a trap. Warden Norton had grown too paranoid and had Andy followed, watching his every move. Andy is beaten savagely in front of the other guards, his face bloodied and bruised. The escape he worked on for decades crumbles in an instant. Norton stands over him, seething with rage. Warden Norton, you really thought you could outsmart me, Dufresne? After everything I've done for you? Andy is dragged back into Shawshank in chains, his spirit broken. Red watches from the prison yard, his heart sinking. He knows what's coming next. The brutal punishment. Andy's failed escape leads to a series of brutal punishments. Warden Norton, furious at the betrayal, decides to make an example out of him. Andy is thrown into solitary confinement, the dreaded hole, for months. The cold, dark cell slowly drives him to the brink of madness. He loses track of time, his once sharp mind unraveling as the days blend into weeks, and the weeks into months. Back in the general population, the other inmates hear rumors of Andy's fate, but no one knows for sure what's happening to him. Red tries to keep hope alive, but even he is starting to feel that the system has finally won. Eventually, after months of isolation, Andy is pulled from solitary and brought before the warden once again. But this time, there is no more pretense. Warden Norton has no intention of letting Andy live any longer. The brutal end. In a final act of cruelty, Warden Norton decides to stage Andy's death as a warning to the other inmates. Late one night, he has Andy dragged out to the prison yard under the cover of darkness. The guards form a circle around him, and Captain Hadley hands Norton a pistol. Warden Norton, coldly. "You should have known better, Dufresne." No one escapes Shawshank. Andy, now a shell of the man he once was, lifts his eyes to the sky one last time. The stars above seem impossibly distant, his dreams of freedom shattered. As Norton pulls the trigger, the shot echoes through the night, and Andy falls to the ground, lifeless. His body is quickly buried in the prison cemetery, marked only by a number, forgotten by the world outside. Red, devastated by the loss of his friend, slips further into despair. He realizes that Shawshank truly is a place where hope dies. In the months that follow, Red receives a letter informing him that his next parole hearing is coming up, but he no longer cares. The dream of freedom that Andy had sparked in him is gone. Red, narrating, "Hope is a dangerous thing. Hope can drive a man insane. And in Shawshank, it's the last thing you should hold on to." In this version, Shawshank remains a place of despair, and the system crushes even the strongest wills. There are no grand escapes, no triumph over evil, just the brutal reality of a world where power and corruption reign supreme. Ending scene. Red's final days, 10 o'clock to end. Years pass and Red remains trapped in Shawshank, a broken man. He goes through the motions, his hope extinguished after Andy's death. His parole hearing comes and goes, but Red no longer even bothers to fight for his release. The spark that Andy had ignited in him has long since faded, leaving only a hollow shell of the man he used to be. In a final act of defiance, Red refuses to live by the prison's rules anymore. One night, he climbs to the roof of the cell block, the same roof where he and Andy once tarred the rooftop years ago. But this time, there is no laughter, no sense of camaraderie. Red stands at the edge, looking out over the dark prison grounds. Red, narrating, "Some birds aren't meant to be caged. Their feathers are just too bright. But here, there's no escaping the cage. Not for me, not for Andy, not for any of us." In this final brutal twist, Red steps off the edge, choosing death over a life of imprisonment. His body is found the next morning, and the cycle of life in Shawshank continues. The system remains intact, as oppressive as ever, crushing anyone who dares to dream of freedom. Narrator, in Red's voice. Hope is a dangerous thing in Shawshank. It's the only thing that'll kill you faster than the guards. In this darker version of the Shawshank Redemption, the prison system wins. Andy's brilliant mind and indomitable will are destroyed by corruption and cruelty. Red, once the wise and hopeful mentor, is left to rot in Shawshank, unable to bear the weight of Andy's loss. The dream of freedom fades, and the prison remains an inescapable trap for all who enter. End.